Hello, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're going to unpack a deeply counterintuitive discovery about workplace representation. It's one of those things that affects almost every modern organization, and it happens completely under the radar of our conscious minds. We're going to look at some truly fascinating new research that reveals how just the presence of highly successful, stereotype-defying employees can actually play a massive trick on our brains, creating what researchers are calling a diversity illusion.
So let me ask you a question to immediately test your own intuition. Imagine you're looking at a major corporation and you find out their chief executive officer is a woman. Does having a woman CEO automatically mean that the company as a whole is highly diverse? Your gut reaction might be to nod your head and think, well, yeah, they must have a great pipeline of female talent and a super inclusive culture. But does a single high-profile hire actually reflect the reality on the ground?
Okay, let's dive into this, because this is exactly where the paradox lies. On one hand, we have what we see, right? A highly successful, stereotype-defying leader standing at the very top of the corporate ladder. But on the other hand, we have what is real, the actual cold, hard demographic data of the organization's workforce. The research we're exploring today shows that our brains actually frequently confuse the two. When we see an exceptional individual, we mistakenly assume they represent the norm. And to understand why we fall for this trap, we kind of need to look under the hood of human cognition.
Section 1. The Psychology of Salience.
It all boils down to a psychological concept called attribute substitution. According to dual process theory, our brains have two modes of thinking. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and analytical. But System 1, that's our fast, intuitive, associative brain. When System 1 faces a really complex question, like what is the overall prevalence of women in this company, it gets, well, a little lazy. It swaps out that difficult calculation for a much simpler one. How easily can I think of a successful woman in this company? It substitutes prevalence for salience. It's a crude but highly efficient shortcut.
The easiest way to grasp this is the classic shark attack analogy. If you ask people how common shark attacks are, they wildly overestimate the number. Why? Not because they're actually frequent, but because they are highly salient. When a shark attack happens, it's terrifying, it's all over the news, it sticks in our memory, it stands out. Well, the exact same mental glitch happens in the workplace. A single, highly salient minority executive stands out so vividly in our minds that their presence completely distorts our perception of the entire company's demographics.
But you might be wondering, why does a minority executive stand out so much more than anyone else? This brings us to the stereotype content model. According to this framework, people unfortunately hold deeply ingrained societal stereotypes about different groups, usually regarding two traits: warmth and competence. Historically, women and racial minorities are frequently stereotyped by society as being less competent or less likely to achieve high corporate success. So when an individual from one of these groups achieves massive success, they defy those societal expectations. They break the mold. And defying a stereotype makes an employee stand out like a beacon. It drastically increases their cognitive salience. To prove this, researchers conducted a fascinating study using real-world data from the S&P 500. Out of over 500 companies analyzed, they looked at the 24 organizations that had women CEOs. They then showed participants the exact, real demographic breakdown of the boards of directors for these companies. And here is the crazy part. Even with the actual data right in front of them, observers who saw that the company had a woman CEO significantly overestimated the number of women on the entire board. The sheer salience of that one female leader totally overpowered the raw numbers.
Moving on to Section 2, the model minority exception.
But as with all great science, we have to push the boundaries and ask a critical question here. Does every successful minority trigger this diversity illusion? Is this mental glitch simply about race or gender in general, or is it specifically triggered by the psychological shock of breaking a stereotype?
And this brilliantly illustrates the answer. The results were absolutely striking. The researchers set up an experiment comparing the perceived prevalence of Black employees versus Asian American employees. Now, in the US, Asian Americans are often subjected to a model minority stereotype, meaning society unfairly stereotypes them as highly competent and successful already. Because of this, a highly successful Asian employee doesn't really defy societal competence expectations. So, exposure to highly successful Black employees who do defy those negative societal stereotypes triggered massively inflated estimates of workplace diversity. But successful Asian employees did not trigger that same illusion. The core finding here is profound. It's the shock of the broken stereotype that tricks our brains. Breaking a societal expectation of low success by becoming highly successful makes someone doubly salient. They draw our attention precisely because their success contradicts an underlying bias. Our brains just latch onto them, and suddenly we overestimate how many people like them are in the room.
Which brings us to Section 3, the downstream danger.
You see, this mental quirk isn't harmless. It actively harms diversity efforts. The researchers turned to archival data from the United Kingdom, analyzing over 10,800 organizations. They looked at companies where women were highly represented in the top income quartiles, basically the highly successful women, and they found a tragic irony. The presence of these successful women at the top led people to overestimate the company's overall diversity. And crucially, these inflated perceptions correlated with larger actual mean and median gender pay gaps across the whole company. The success at the top was literally masking deeper inequities down below.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the direct impact on hiring. It's astonishing. In another study, participants were asked to make a hiring decision after being exposed to a specific workplace. When participants saw a workplace where women were present but less successful, they chose to hire a female candidate about 63.9% of the time. But when they were exposed to a workplace with highly successful women, the likelihood of them hiring another woman plummeted to just 50.5%.
Let's move to and see how this builds. It creates a very specific psychological domino effect. Step 1. Exposure to successful, stereotype-defying women. Step 2. This exposure creates the illusion, artificially inflating the estimated percentage of women employees in the observer's mind. And Step 3. Because they mistakenly believe diversity has already been achieved, it completely kills the urgency to hire more women. It is a perfect, completely unintended trap.
All right, Section 4, fixing our faulty intuitions.
So, the crucial point is, how do we break free from this trap? Well, we can no longer trust our gut when it comes to organizational representation. Relying on our System 1 intuition naturally leads to inflated estimates and reduced diversity efforts. We must actively override our fast brains by engaging System 2, relying on cold, hard metrics and data. By forcing ourselves to look at the actual numbers on a spreadsheet rather than the standout individuals in the boardroom, we acknowledge the truth and sustain the necessary momentum for inclusive hiring.
The researchers actually leave us with a very clear, impartial warning about corporate strategies. They note that by merely poaching successful women and racial minorities from other firms just to place them in highly visible roles, organizations might be prioritizing short-term cosmetic solutions over the hard work of developing their own internal, diverse employee pipelines. A single high-profile hire is not a cure-all. In fact, as we've seen, it might be the very thing blinding a company to its own shortcomings.
Which leaves us with one final provocative question to ask ourselves as we look at our own workplaces. Are you truly looking at the data, or are you just looking at the top? It's incredibly inspiring to see stereotype-defying leaders succeed, absolutely, but we cannot let their bright light blind us to the broader reality of the entire organization. I really hope this explainer has given you a powerful new lens to which to view your workplace. Stay curious, always check the numbers, and thank you so much for joining me to explore this fascinating research.